I'm Miney Smith, and one of the people who volunteers at the History Center, and wanted to welcome you all here to what should be it's actually our 43rd roundtable. So, and today's speakers have graciously donated their time to keep our history alive, and we want to recognize this dedication to historic preservation. No speaker has ever asked for payment for providing time and expertise, and we don't charge admission. They are free and open to all. We appreciate the generosity of donors who make these programs possible, and invite our followers to join the Bonner spirit of community and make a donation if you haven't already. If you'd like to donate it away today, there's some forms on the table as you come in, or you can scan the QR code on the slips for the quick way to donate. Just some housekeeping things. Call your attention to the Parker and Callie are selling books there, and Robin is selling T-shirts and these wonderful hats. So we'll hope that you might buy one. And Sally Thompson is separately selling her books over here on the by the wall. She spoke at last month's roundtable. Special other important notes: the bathrooms are behind these panels and down the hallway. Our thanks to MCAT for providing the important gift to preserve our timber heritage history. Ron is back with us today, and thanks again to the Media Assistance Grant that MCAT donates. Today's completed program will premiere on the MCAT channel 189 a month from now, and downloaded to video on demand and YouTube. And all previous roundtables are available on our website, bonnermilltownhistory.org. Thank you to St. Anne Catholic Parish. They have supported our program since the beginning, and our first roundtable was held in this room in January of 2009. And today's program is in conjunction with their annual pasty dinner. Be sure to enjoy a Better Than Butte pasty after the program. They're wonderful. You can dine in or carry it out. Thanks to Friends of Two Rivers, who sponsor the Bonner Milltown History Center and Museum, and to Walter Peckham, our wonderful sound technician, and also to Steve Nielsen, Mike Bowman, and Mike Heisey for providing a home for the History Center. We're in the Bonner Post Office, which is down the road just a little bit, and open to the public on Wednesdays 10 to noon, on Tuesdays 9 to noon. The coffee groups meet for lively conversation and cookies, and on Fridays the Old Road group and Rabbit Holes groups meets at 10. And I see there are a lot of folks here from both of those groups. Today we'll have a traveling mic for questions. Please wait for the mic so everyone can hear you. And start by saying your name, because it'll be important for the recording. We'll have a brief intermission partway through today's presentation for a book purchase and/or a bathroom break. That does it for announcements, so I'm going to turn it over to Judy Mattson.
Thank you, Miney. It's great to see everybody here, and it's especially an honor to see the panel that's seated here behind me. And it's a very great honor to be able to introduce them to you. But first, I want to give you a little bit of an explanation about our program. realized that any one of our panelists could teach an entire semester-long class on the topic that he or she is representing here today, and we have asked them to condense that into 20 minutes. So there's not going to be a lot of deep dives into the history. It's going to be more of an introduction, remembering for many of you that I see in the audience who were participants in this project, and then an introduction for those of you who are new here and maybe didn't realize that there used to be a Milltown Dam over there where the river is now. So it's going to be a fun experience for you to learn about this, and a heightened sense of place for those of you who are newcomers. So Peter, Diana, behind me, Doug, and Mike are kindly sharing their knowledge with us, and we really appreciate that. In addition, Doug and Diana are reprising a round-trip drive from Helena to Bonner in questionable weather conditions, just like we're having today. Perhaps the only improvement is that you're driving in the daylight instead of late at night after a meeting in Bonner that was perhaps held in this very room. As time allows, we're going to allow the audience to ask questions during the presentation or share an anecdote. But please be patient with us, because we're going to guide the timing of this pretty carefully just to make sure all four of our panelists have time to speak today. After the presentations are over, time permitting, we will have an open mic, and we'll have a chance for more audience participation at that time. So let's get started with part one of our program today. What is the history behind the cleanup? The dam removal and restoration of the river, and how can 2.2 million cubic yards of material under a reservoir be cleaned up? On your programs are incomplete biographies of each of our speakers. They all have such rich careers that we didn't really do justice to them with what we have printed there. Peter Nielsen represented Missoula County and was instrumental in documenting the need for action and was active throughout the entire remediation, restoration, and redevelopment process. Peter will be followed by Diana Hammer, who is wearing two hats today, as she recounts EPA's role. Russ Forba, the remedial project manager, is unable to attend, and Diana will discuss the remediation and her role as community involvement coordinator. Once again, to reiterate what Miney said, please remember to raise your hand if you have a question or comment, and wait for either Kim Brigham or Dennis Seen to bring you a mic. Please say your name, as well as transcribing these programs is a whole lot easier if we know who you are. So thank you, and we'll get started.
All right, welcome everyone. It's sure nice to be here. It's been about 7 years since I retired, and I haven't done a PowerPoint presentation since then, so I'm a little rusty. I gotta keep this closer to my mouth, so I'm already being corrected. But it's great to see you here. And the other day I went into the courthouse to get my license plate renewed, and I got one of the Milltown license plates. And the guy behind the counter, I asked him, "Oh, what do you know about this?" And he said, "I don't know, I just moved here 5 years ago." Well, there was a dam. There's a dam in that picture. There's a dam? There was a dam out there? Yeah, they had no idea. What was all the fuss about? Well, I guess we're going to talk a little bit about what all the fuss was about. So Judy asked me to describe some of the events and some of the people that led to the decision to remove the dam and do the cleanup at Milltown. And then these guys, my fellow panelists, are going to take it from there, talk about the remediation, the restoration, and then the park development that happened after that. But I've got 100 years to cover in less than 20 minutes, so I better get started. I'm going to start about 100 miles upstream, and 100 years ago. Turn of the century, Butte was home to about 100,000 people. 20,000 of them were miners. And by 1925, Butte was producing half of the country's copper production. This is one of the miners that worked up there at the time, miners and smelters, named William Andrews Clark. He also owned a lumber mill down here, the Western Mill, which is where the town pump is on the banks of the Blackfoot now. And he's the one that built the Milltown Dam. I'm going to skip that one for now. I apologize, these are a little small, but the miners that worked in Butte created some environmental problems. There was a lot of smoke in the air, but they also created waste products from their mines called tailings. And the practice at the time was just to dump the tailings down by the creek. And these are some of the dumps that were there. And note the date, that's 1906. So we're going to move forward. And Milltown Dam was built by William Andrews Clark starting in 1906 and finished in 1908. Not a very big dam, kind of an average height, 21 foot hydraulic height, and built with the old technology. And it's really hard to see in that little picture, but it's a timber crib dam. Shortly after the dam was finished, the biggest flood on record on the Clark Fork occurred, something like a 100-year flood. And the powerhouse of the dam was submerged. The spillway was heavily damaged by this flood. It created a little bit of a fuss in Missoula. This is an article from the Daily Missoulian at the time. And one of the headlines there, if you can't read it, says, "Firm as a mountain as the dam." There's no danger of the power dam going out than there is the mountains washing down the river. The dam is as firm and as solid as it could be. Skip that one. But when the waters receded, the dam was a shambles. The left third of the dam and the entire toe had been washed out, and much of the foundation of the dam had also been damaged. It needed to be rebuilt. So rebuild it they did. But the dam also, the flood also carried those sediments that were deposited, those mine tailings that were deposited up along Silver Bow Creek up in Butte. It deposited transported a whole bunch of those downstream. Some of those were deposited in what are called slickens along the Clark Fork River, along Silver Bow Creek. And they left quite a mess that we're still working on cleaning up today. And this is a picture of a bend of the Clark Fork River in the Deer Lodge Valley that's heavily impacted by mine tailings. Those sediments also washed down behind Clark's Dam. And this is a picture that was taken many years later during a drawdown of about 10 feet of the dam. So you can see the sediments were really filling that reservoir up. Nobody thought much about those sediments for many years. Milltown moved along and developed. People swam in the reservoir. There was a riverside park just downstream of the dam, electric trolley car. All these things were wonderful. But folks in Milltown kind of always knew there was something wrong with their water. I know this is probably hard to read. This is from the book that they're selling over here, Mildred Dufresne's book, and I'll just read it to you. It says, water practically surrounds Milltown, yet it has always been a problem. There's only one good well. There were a few other wells which did not have very good water, and it was thought they were contaminated by the copper mine residue laden waters of the Clark Fork River. But nobody really knew much about what was in the water, because what was in the water is something you couldn't really see or taste or smell, and it was arsenic. Thanks. Go back. Okay. This fellow, Ed Zulager, who lived just upstream in Clinton, worked for the health department. He collected a water sample under a very new environmental law. This is 1981. There's an environmental law that was passed in the 70s called the Safe Drinking Water Act. And he took the first water samples from Milltown that found arsenic. And there was so much arsenic in those samples that we thought there must be some mistake. Everyone thought, go back out and take another sample. There's a lab error, something's wrong. The next sample came back even higher. And then to make a long story short, some professors at the university, Johnny Moore and Bill Wissner, went out and cored through the ice in the reservoir and collected samples of the sediment and found that sediment actually contained high amounts of heavy metals, including arsenic. So this eventually led in 1983 to the designation of this Milltown site as one of the country's first Superfund sites. Superfund was a law that was also fairly new at the time, passed in 1980. And I'll let Diana talk more about the Superfund. But that was, again, 1983. So from this time forward till about 1996, much of the discussion was about what to do with the arsenic plume. And this picture is probably really hard for you to see, but it's a picture of the two rivers, and there's a yellow outline on there that shows the boundaries of the arsenic plume in groundwater. So much of the discussion was, what do we do about that? How do we either clean that up or keep people from drinking it? And as we moved into the 90s, it was pretty clear to most of us that the decision was going to be to leave the dam in place. In fact, EPA had already done a feasibility study. That was you're going to talk about this. So that was where we were headed. It was going to be leave the dam in place, keep people from drinking the water, so you ban drinking water wells in this area, basically, to protect public health. But something just changed a few years later. In 1996, Mother Nature kind of intervened. And there's a photo here that I took. It was a Friday morning. I'm just going to stop for a second and tell a story. Catch my breath. On my way out to the dam, I was on my way out to the dam again. We assumed that the dam was going to be staying in place. We wanted to know that everybody was drinking safe water. So I was working for the City County Health Department. My job was that day to go out and collect some water samples at residences that surrounded the reservoir to make sure they weren't drinking arsenic, or that their water was clean. And I heard on the way out on the radio that there had been this ice jam coming down the Blackfoot River. It had come out of the North Fork of the Blackfoot, and it was coming down the Blackfoot at 10 miles per hour, 10 feet high, barreling down, knocking out bridges and knocking homes off their foundations, and snapping all the ponderosa pine trees like they were toothpicks. And I said, hey, I better go down to the dam and see what's going on. When I got there, I saw a river that was very, very turbid, silvery gray water. I'd never really seen anything like it. So I took a water sample. It's Friday. I shipped it in. Yeah, we took more water samples again on Saturday. The results came back the next week, and we found out that, lo and behold, it wasn't the arsenic that was a concern, it was the copper. That the ice and the flood was scouring these sediments out that contained very high levels of copper, high enough to kill the fish. And it turns out Fish, Wildlife, and Parks had done a fish electro sampling the previous year, and they went back the next year. Turns out the river had lost, 60 to 80% of its fish, depending on species and age class. So it's a big event. So while it had been kind of sleepy out here for a while, the whole concern about the groundwater wasn't generating that much public concern, except for here in the local community. When people found out that this was going to kill the fish,
Oh boy.
they got pretty excited. So EPA had received more public comments on that, and there was no public comment period. But they received more public comments on that issue. I don't know if you were there at the time. That's before your time. But they received more than any other Superfund site in the western U.S. ever. And it wasn't even a public comment period. So it created quite a ruckus. And it changed things. And one thing it did change, it changed the views of the Montana office directors, John Wardell, who was a great guy. We're lucky we had John Wardell as a Montana office director, one of the best. He made a decision, and it's probably hard to read this slide, but he basically, the county, Missoula County, Jean Curtis is here, she was the county commissioner. County requested additional study. We said, look, I know you're heading towards leaving the dam in place, but let's take another look at dam removal and sediment removal. And John Wardell said, we've decided to re-examine our thinking, and he ordered an additional feasibility study. That's 1996. So what that did then is gave several more years, basically of delay, for other events that occurred that sealed the dam's fate. One of those issues was fish. And there's a fisheries biologist named David Schmetterling who worked on this site, and he became active in 1998 at the site and done some really great work. This is a picture, it's kind of hard to see what it is, but standing on the spillway, looking down the spillway, and there's a shadow down there at the base of the spillway. Well, it's not a shadow, that's fish. That's thousands of fish still trying to get up past the dam after 100 years. So he was charged to study fish passage. Should they do a fish ladder? Should they do manual fish passage? He was doing manual fish passage. He's putting cutthroat trout and bull trout into coolers and trucking them upstream and letting them loose in the Blackfoot. But he also was really interested in public education. And so he went to some of the schools all the way up the Blackfoot and the Sealy Swan, and they formed an Adopt a Trout program. And the Sealy Lake Elementary School adopted a trout name, and they named it Pollywog. And Pollywog had a radio transmitter. But one day, David got a phone call from a fisherman, said, "Hey, I've got a northern pike with a radio transmitter out here." See, northern pike had been introduced into the reservoir, and they're voracious predators. In fact, I'm going to go to the next slide. There's one right there. That's a monster. They really are trout-killing machines. And so what had happened to Pollywog is that Pollywog was killed by a northern pike, and a fisherman had found it. And this got into the newspaper and got into the press and created a big ruckus. And suddenly, the demographic of school children and their parents was solidly covered. They were all for doing something about this dam. And that made a big difference. So the fish issues, the other thing about the fisheries issues, it was ka-ching, ka-ching. Every time they turned around, the company was having to spend more money on this dam. It was already, I think at that time it was maybe barely profitable, but soon became unprofitable. It was losing money, and they're pouring money into dealing with fish issues. Then the next thing that happened is some dam safety issues came up. And they weren't new, they've been happening before, but they started happening more frequently and more seriously at this time. There was spillway leakage that occurred, and a void that occurred into the crest of the spillway. And I've got to move right along. And Missoula County hired an engineer to criticize some of the dam work. I'm going to tell one story. One day I was at my desk at lunch, and I was surfing the internet, eating my lunch, and I went on to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission website. And I found this document. I know you can't read it, but what it says is that they found a void at the top of the crest of the spillway, like 12 to 18 inches. It shouldn't be. There's basically the material in the spillway had been settling. And they had a big void. Now, what was unusual about this is that FERC posted this information, and it wasn't supposed to be there because of 9/11. There was a critical infrastructure thing. You know, they didn't want terrorists finding out about Grand Coulee Dam. They didn't want them lobbing Scud missiles at Milltown Dam either. But, so anyway, they found this. This created a huge fuss. And in fact, it was in newspapers all over the country because they're withholding information from Missoula County, whose residents, most of which live downstream of this dam, and they're obviously very concerned about it. Let me move along. So anyway, dam safety became a big issue. Missoula County, we're thinking about the reasons that the dam was removed. I have to say, Missoula County's support for this, and Missoula County's work was a big part of the reason. Missoula County proposed the Two Rivers restoration plan, and I know you guys will talk about restoration and redevelopment. This is kind of the first conceptual plan that was out there. And it attracted a lot of interest. It intrigued people. People were interested in hearing about this. Another reason that the dam is removed is some of the people that worked at Missoula County, one of which is Barbara Evans. And there's a lot of things Barbara did. But one story I want to tell about Barbara is when all this dam safety stuff was going on, they weren't going to give us the information. They weren't going to share documents with us. It was all secret. Don't want it to get in the hands of terrorists. But once they got done with a few phone calls with Barbara, they decided to take their chances with the terrorists. We got the documents, and it made a big difference. I think it was critical. Another person that was real involved is here today, Jean Curtis. And Jean took the time out of her busy schedule and traveled all the way to Wisconsin to learn about, to visit several communities where they had removed dams and they had done dredging projects. And she found out great information that she could bring back, and it allayed a lot of the public fears that people had about what would happen when they took the dam out. For one thing, all the fish didn't wash downstream, we found out. And they knew how to swim. So public support for the dam removal was key, and that's really how this crystallized. I'm just going to breeze through this real quick, but several organizations formed. The Friends of Two Rivers formed locally, the Milltown Redevelopment Group. Several of those folks, several folks in the audience were part of those groups. And the other thing is we had bipartisan support, because Barbara came along, she brought along legislators like Dale Mallam and Dick Haynes and others, and eventually they convinced Judy Martz. The other thing that we have to give credit to the Clark Ford Coalition, I think, in great degree, for their campaign. The coalition, Tracy Snow Manning, Chris Brick, and Karen Knutson, I'm going to single them out. There's many other people at the coalition, but those three in particular I want to single out for credit, because they did a science-based advocacy, but a clever campaign that became less of a campaign and more of a movement towards dam removal. Remember some of these ads if you were around? The billboards? Warning, history, these are billboards. Here's one that's the skiers. Ski Milltown, it's toxic. There was newspaper ads, television ads, all kinds of things. And they had a big impact. They mobilized the community. They got people interested. They did it with a positive vision of here's what Milltown looks like today and what it could look like in the future. They did floating rallies where it was 104 degrees out there and everybody wanted to be on the river, and people got engaged with the idea. And eventually, we had 15,000 citizens weigh in with public comment. So I give those folks credit. That's really the reason the Milltown Dam was removed. Because the folks weighed in with their comments. Eventually, they convinced Judy Martz, our governor, to throw the full weight of her administration behind the dam removal. And as she said, it's simply the right thing to do. In my last slide, I just want to give a nod to a project manager that we had at Milltown, Russ Forbo, who couldn't be here today. This is a picture of Russ and his wife Jackie at the breach of the dam in 2008. And Russ was a great project manager to work for. I've worked with a ton of them over the years. He's by far the best. And I wish he could be with us today. So I'm going to pass it on now to Diana. I'm going to skip that and let you go ahead with the next portion of this.
Do you want to take a question? Judy, do you want him to take any questions? You want to do any questions? Or? Oh, are there any questions for Peter before I start? Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you all for being here. It is just kind of like old home week or something. I'm driving over from Helena, and I don't even want to count how many times I've driven from Helena to here for a Milltown meeting, a public meeting, a construction meeting, or an event. And Peter, you did a wonderful job describing the need for dam removal and the evolution of our thinking as we. So there'll be a little duplication, but hopefully that's, I'll speed through the duplicate parts. There's a little overlap. So this is a map that you've probably seen. There's a version of it over there. As Peter mentioned, this was the first Superfund site one of the first in the United States and the very first in Montana. It was originally just the Milltown drinking water concern, but then it expanded into the reservoir sediments, and then the Clark Fork became part of it. So it was a two-part, or really a three-part Superfund site, and combined the Milltown, Clark Fork, Butte, and Anaconda together. They comprise really the largest Superfund complex in the whole United States. I think that's still true. It's been true for a long time. So it's a lot going on in a really beautiful basin. And so the Milltown Dam was constructed, as Peter mentioned, in 1908 at the confluence of the Blackfoot and Clark Fork rivers. And for much of the 20th century, it looked really peaceful. People boated, fished, learned to ice skate, recreated on this beautiful reservoir. But meanwhile, unbeknownst to many of us until 1981, there were toxins in the sediments that were causing problems. And when it was discovered in 1981, and it looked like the culprit really was the arsenic in the sediment behind the dam. And so arsenic, if it's in contact with oxygen, it's not very mobile. But in anoxic conditions, like buried under a reservoir in the sediments, the arsenic becomes mobile. And over the course of that century, the arsenic started migrating into the drinking water supply. And here, people are on well and septic, and so that was really a concern. And we didn't know until that fortunate sample in 1981. And the timing was good because in 1980, Congress passed CERCLA, which we refer to as Superfund, and that is the priority list of sites to be cleaned up, sites with contamination so serious that it's a national priority. And it's based on the polluter pays principle. So if you can figure out who's responsible for the contamination, they should foot the bill for the cleanup. And so initially, as Peter mentioned, the focus was on the public health risk because we knew there was arsenic in drinking water. Arsenic's a carcinogen. We wanted to make sure that we protected the public drinking water supply. So first thing EPA did was issue an emergency order and put local residents on a safe alternative drinking water supply. You can still see the blue tower, the blue water tower. That is the original safe drinking water supply. And then also, as Peter mentioned, sometimes it takes a little while to get folks thinking differently. And Superfund was new, and the focus initially was on public health. But as the thinking evolved, as studies were done, and then when Mother Nature intervened in 1996, really got our attention because there were lots of people calling for, you can't just look at public health risks, you also need to look at ecological risk. And so in 1996, when we saw the copper, and you may know this, but fish are super sensitive to copper, even tiny amounts. And there was a lot of copper and with significant fish kill. So that changed EPA's thinking, and we slowed down the process, which is hard to do because we were really close to having a plan, and we were going to leave the dam in place and only address the public health risks. So we stopped the process under the leadership of John Wardell, who, and thank you for mentioning John and Russ. They were just the most amazing people to work with, and John sadly died in 2009, and then Russ couldn't be here today. So, our thinking shifted, and we decided we needed a better plan that addressed public health and ecological risk. So we identified the arsenic groundwater plume, which is the orange in this diagram, and the Superfund site, the Milltown operable unit, is shown in the green. So the Superfund site was declared in 1983, so 20 years later, which is a long time, but groundwater cleanup, all this was really new, and trying to figure out how to move forward and how to best address the public health and now the environmental and ecological risks as well. So in May 2003, we issued a draft proposed plan that went out for public comment. And the idea was to remove the dam and the sediment, but to take those excavated sediments and put them in a local repository. And so we put this plan out for public comment. And we got comment, and it was kind of amazing. There were two main takeaways. Overwhelmingly, actually Bonner and Milltown were pretty evenly divided on whether or not the dam should be removed or not. But overwhelmingly, people loved the idea of dam and sediment removal, hated the idea of a local repository. So we reviewed those comments, because that's what you do with public comments. You should take them and carefully consider them. And we came up with a new plan. And there's a lot. I'm skipping so much detail, but if you have 20 minutes to talk about a big project. So a year later, we came out with a second proposed plan, and this one, dam and sediment removal. But in the meantime, working with the responsible party, which is ARCO, now owned by British Petroleum, we came up with a plan to excavate those sediments, haul them away, and then use them in a beneficial manner at the Anaconda Smelter Superfund site. And so this was our proposed plan. And we, as Peter mentioned, we got 15,000 public comments. And we reviewed them all. And overwhelmingly, they were 98% in favor of what we were proposing, which I've worked on a lot of Superfund site cleanups, never had that many comments, and never had that many, it was never so one-sided. And this actually really opened my eyes too, because I know people are, I think as humans, we often react most strongly when we're against something. There was such strong reaction in favor of something, which was, like Peter mentioned, the Clark Fork River Technical Assistance Committee, the Clark Fork Coalition, Friends of Two Rivers, all this public outreach. Missoula County, super supportive. And yeah, it was amazing. It was just really an amazing process to watch. So I'm going to focus on the remediation, but this was really an integrated project. And those of you who were involved probably maybe got sick of it, but we talked about the 3 R's a lot: remediation, restoration, redevelopment, all integrated to literally lay the groundwork for the next phase. And so for remediation, our goals: restore the drinking water supply, protect the fishery, and provide fish passage. Because like Peter mentioned, that shadow of fish lined up to go upstream, the dam was a major barrier. So in order to permanently address the drinking water supply and protect the fishery, we needed to remove the contaminated sediment. And the yellow hatched area there is the area that had the most highly contaminated sediment, so 2.2 million cubic yards. So that was what was removed. We did a lot of monitoring, years and years and years of monitoring upstream and downstream of the site for water quality. We made sure we were monitoring the wells for drinking water standards to make sure to see where the arsenic levels were, and wanted to see them be dropping down below 10 parts per billion. And so when we started the remediation, the first step was to dewater. And we lowered the reservoir 12 feet in 2006, because if we're going to start excavating, we need to have a dry area to work. So the area, that big triangle there, as Peter mentioned, that was when we drew down the reservoir 12 feet, those were the original sediments that were exposed. So by September, you can see, and it was really interesting. So when we drew down the reservoir, we had grasses come up that were seeds from before the dam or the reservoir was flooded, and we found stumps, because as Peter mentioned, was a timber crib dam. And where would you get timber if you didn't want to haul it very far? You just cut the trees right there. So we found the original stumps as we started the excavation. So in order to protect these contaminated sediments from spring high flows, we first built a rock berm around the sediments. And then right paralleling I-90, that's the beginning of the bypass channel, because we needed to move the Clark Fork on the right over into the bypass channel so we could then excavate underneath the Clark Fork. Then we started digging up the sediments. And then not every Superfund site, well, there are a couple of unique things about this Superfund site, but not every Superfund site needs to build a rail spur to haul out your sediments. And not every Superfund site has an observation deck. We had that handy bluff overlook where people could watch from a safe distance. Well, not so much now, but at the time you could watch from a safe distance and see the construction going on. And then we also had the good fortune of having Gary and Judy Mattson fly the site regularly and provide all these wonderful aerial photographs. So I should have probably mentioned that a little earlier. So we built the rail spur, so we would dig up the sediments, we would load them into the rail cars, and then every day, pretty much for 2 years, 100 train loads of sediments, or train car loads of sediments would haul them off-site for disposal. And this is another aerial view of stockpiled sediments, and that 100-car train headed off to Anaconda. And so there we're building the bypass channel on the far left. And then when it was completed and lined, we moved the Clark Fork into the bypass channel to dry out the Clark Fork bed so we could excavate. And here's an image of the dam and the powerhouse. And there was a lot of interest in saving the powerhouse as a historic structure, and we just could not. For the remediation goals, we probably could have left it in place, but we were also working with our partners, NRD and the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and to meet restoration goals, you couldn't leave something blocking the river. So, and the tribes really have a really long view of history, and so 100 years wasn't much in their perspective. So we salvaged what we could. We salvaged the control panel, which turned out to be marble. So when you build a powerhouse in the early 1900s, I guess you can build a control panel out of marble. And we saved some of the windows and some of the bricks, but ultimately the powerhouse had to come down. And it came down quickly. It was amazing how quickly that the bricks just crumbled. And so there we have the powerhouse is gone. You can see the sheet piling, keeping the water out, the Clark Fork River out of the area where the powerhouse was, allowing us to work without, having to work in wet material. And then here we are with the breach of the Milltown Dam at the end of March 28th, 2008. And many of you may have been up on the bluff watching. It's a pretty historic event. American Rivers filmed the whole thing and did a time lapse. It's a pretty cool video to watch. And then in 2008 and 2009, we continued to excavate the 2.3 million cubic yards of sediment, dig, haul, or dig, load, haul, and repeat every day. And then we were issuing these weekly updates. I just went in and pulled one from about this time from 2009. And we would provide weekly updates on what we'd accomplished, what was coming, any public meetings, any special events coming up. And those initially were weekly, and then as things slowed down, they went bi-weekly. I think we issued over 100 of these. And then almost a year to the date of the initial dam breach, you can see the excavators starting to open up and breach the area of the coffer dam. So with this, the powerhouse is gone, the spillway is gone, and now there's no impediment for the rivers to run free for the first time in 100 years. And it was really interesting. Actually, in March of 2008, a month after the dam was breached, we had a radio-tagged fish that we found, David Schmetterling found, way up the Blackfoot. So even though those fish, under their own volition, couldn't go upstream for 100 years, as soon as they could, they did. And it was just really exciting. So then, so then the rivers are running free. So this is just a month later, and again, Matson's aerial photography here. And after 2 years of daily train loads of sediments leaving the site, we sent our last train load off-site in September of 2009. And again, this was just a really integrated project. And Doug will talk about restoration. Mike will talk more about the redevelopment in the state park. But I just want to say one thing. Even before the decision had been made to restore or remove the dam and restore the river or not, in 2003 it was out for public comment. We weren't sure what the decision would be, but very early on we formed a community advisory group made up of a diverse group of people from the area, some from Missoula, most from the Bonner Milltown area, and we posed a really big question, like, so what would you, as a community, like to see in 10, 20, or even 50 years? And even though people had maybe different ideas of what should ultimately happen with the dam, they came back and said, we would like a public space for all people, all abilities, and all time, which just is so encouraging because at the time, I mean, this is like a huge aspirational stretch goal because at the time it was privately owned, it was underwater, and it was contaminated. And so, like, set your sights high and look what happens. So it was really a treat to work with, and some of the original Milltown redevelopment working group members are here. And we met in the basement, I think initially for 6 meetings, and that went on for a couple of years. Yeah. Anyway, so with that, I will turn it over and just say thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
I have one question as far as the arsenic over all the years that people were drinking it, and I know they've done some of this in Butte. Have they done a county health of cancer increased risk here compared to other areas over the previous years?
It'd be nice to have an easy answer to that. It's hard to study in a small population and get an answer. It's really frustrating. I actually studied public health, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to study public health was like in epidemiology, you can try and answer those, but you need a big enough number with a high enough incidence rate to actually say this is linked directly to that. And I don't believe we ever found any studies that said, now we know arsenic is a known human carcinogen, so we know that, and that was enough, but we never were able to say exactly. So it was really, personally it was really frustrating, and it's nice, it would have been nice to say definitively, but we just knew that it was really important to address the public health risks. Thanks. Oh, here's a question.
I was wondering if all that stuff they removed is still over in Anaconda.
It is. He was wondering if all the sediments that we removed are still over in Anaconda, and yeah, it was a little frustrating. The organic content of the sediments removed here was really high because it was reservoir sediments and material washing downstream for 100 years. And the contaminant levels were relatively low if they weren't in water. But in water, they were really way too high. So contaminating the drinking water, posing a risk to fish. So the idea was that these sediments with all that organic material would be beneficial to help at the opportunity ponds to help grow vegetation to protect the repository down there. It didn't work nearly as well as all the bench scale tests had initially indicated. So that was disappointing, but they're all still there. So.
Why did they choose Anaconda for that?
Well, so.
The question.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. Why did they choose Anaconda? So I mentioned that under Superfund, you've got a responsible party, and so ARCO, and now owned by British Petroleum, had the questionable fortune, I guess, of being responsible for the cleanup in the whole in the whole Deer Lodge Valley, all the way from Butte over to here. And since they were responsible for creating a cover on the Opportunity Ponds as part of the Anaconda Smelter Superfund site, they thought it would actually be helpful for them to take the sediment from here with high organic material, which should be a good growth medium, and apply it to cover up the Opportunity Ponds. And yeah, it just didn't work so well, but since they were responsible for that site as well, they wanted to do it, and that was part of the long story about how we we changed the second proposed plan that I didn't really get into. Okay, yeah.
So the arsenic and copper levels have reduced?
She asked if the arsenic and copper levels have reduced. So we removed the most highly contaminated sediments, that 2.2 million cubic yards of material, and that represented about 80% of the contamination overall. We weren't able to remove all of it, and at some point you have diminishing levels of return, like you do a lot of ecological destruction in order to get just a little more cleanup. So that was kind of the balance. They continued to monitor the monitoring wells for arsenic, and I understand. Maybe Doug could answer this. I haven't worked on the project for a little while.
There are a few of the wells that are downstream or down gradient of some of the contaminants that were left in place that have arsenic concentrations that are above the drinking water standard that they continue to monitor. And I know ARCO is proposing now to do an impracticability, ask for a waiver on those, because they don't think, because of most of the sediments that are left in place are actually beneath the interstate. And the wells down gradient of the interstate are the ones that are slightly above the drinking water standard.
And those are monitoring wells, not drinking water.
Yeah, yes, monitoring wells. They're specifically put in to monitor the quality of the groundwater.
Thank you. Maybe, should we move on?
Are there any more questions? If not, we will take a 10-minute recess. You can stretch your legs, get a book or two or three, and a shirt and a hat, and a bathroom break, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Okay, now I want to thank our first two presenters for doing a magnificent job of making such a huge project so understandable in a short time. And now we're going to conclude with the final two segments of this amazing project. And we're going to think about these questions. How is the floodplain of a major river reconstructed to make the river feel connected and at home? And finally, what benefits did all of this redevelopment project create for us or for anyone? Doug Martin is currently the National Resource Damage Program Administrator, but during the Superfund days, he was the project manager for the restoration. And if you are following along on the bios that I printed, I realized after I got home with 100 copies in my hand, I had said, Doug's, he was the project manager, and he led a team of much more knowledgeable scientists and engineers in the development of the rest of them. Those were Doug's words. I did not write that, and nor did I notice it in time to get it out before I had it printed. However, I think it's a good thing that it came out that way, because what it shows is something really important about this project. His disclaimer speaks to the attitude among the professionals, the engineers, and indeed everyone who was involved in the project. Everyone in the project was much more knowledgeable than others in something pertaining to the project. It was the fact that all of them, with their expertise, were willing to pool that knowledge for the success of the project, rather than looking for individual glory. That's what made it work. So finally, who benefited from the project? Certainly the river, the fish and wildlife. We have a clean aquifer, and all of us have benefited. And so Mike Kustudia is going to sum this up for us as the final part of our redevelopment program today. He's going to sum up what redevelopment has offered to us. Michael has a unique perspective as he was the first manager of Milltown State Park, but also he has a deep personal connection to the area. So enjoy the rest of the program, and then we will, as Kim suggested, in about 10 minutes, enjoy pasties.
Thank you, Judy. My name is Doug Martin. I am with the Natural Resource Damage Program. It's kind of a unique program within the state of Montana. We're a program that got initiated back in the late 1980s with the passage of the Superfund law. The Superfund law has a very unique part of it that it allows the states to sue for damages to the natural resources from the release of hazardous substance. And in this case, the state, back in the late 80s, early 1990s, had a lawsuit against Atlantic Richfield, who had bought the Anaconda Company for the damages that the mining and smelting activities did throughout the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. I started with the program in 2009. In 1999, we had our first settlement with Atlantic Richfield, so we had a pot of money that the state could use to help to restore the resources of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. So I was very fortunate to have come along at that time, and just the way the project managers got assigned different projects, everybody was busy. When this Milltown project started to take hold and they started talking about how things were going to occur, the program manager at that time said, "Hey, Doug, do you want to go to a meeting at Milltown?" I said, "Sure." So, 20 some odd years later, here we are. It's kind of a unique year. This is our year. I'll talk a little bit about it, but we've gone through our 15 years of monitoring post-restoration activities. So it's been a very successful project. But to start out from the restoration, we're supposed to talk about that. How did we get here? So back when when the dam was first talked about coming out, there was the discussion of, how do we integrate restoration, or can we integrate restoration? So Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, local biologist Pat Sappel, who we work very closely with, plus some local experts, looked at this area and said, if they remove this dam, can we rebuild a naturally functioning system behind that? So that was the very first question. So we did look at that, and the response was yes, we could do that. So the first thing that we had to do is we had to come up with some goals and objectives to help lead us. And the project as a whole, as Diana had talked about, the main goal that EPA was dealt with was trying to protect human health and the environment, and they were going to do that by removing the dam and some of the contaminated sediment behind the dam. From a restoration perspective, our main goal was to construct a naturally functioning river system where the dam was located, and have that system function naturally go into the future. We had several other goals. We wanted to use native materials. We wanted to maintain water quality. The maintain water quality was set because there are a lot of contaminated sediments still out there, like with the groundwater question. There's sediments beneath the interstate, and there were sediments upstream that we're not able to remove everything. We also wanted to make a aesthetically pleasing area. The goal was to turn it over to a park at the end of the day. One of the very unique, interesting aspects of the whole negotiations of how remediation, restoration, and redevelopment came apart, there were several years of negotiations that went on behind closed doors in Missoula and in Helena. Some of those closed doors negotiations dealt with the land that Northwestern Power or Northwestern Energy owned at the time. Those 460 acres were actually turned over to the state of Montana as part of their natural resource damage claim. And so we were able to provide that to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for the park development. And that was one of the, to be honest with you, the head negotiator for the state of Montana, Rob Collins, who has passed. I always was baffled by how he got that. There are some things that went on that, it's like, wow, that was pretty cool, Rob. How did you get that 400 acres? But he did get that. So from a restoration perspective, I'm not going to talk a lot about the negotiations, but how did we get to where we are now? So you saw this picture. This was a picture that Peter had up at the beginning. We didn't have many photographs. The only photographs that we had of the dam, pre-dam, was one photo that Pinky and Mrs. Harris had in their little trailer across the reservoir on the far side. But it was so foggy, it was such a cloudy photo, you really couldn't see. You could see there were some trees there, but you really couldn't see the confluence or anything. We do have this drawing of the Mullen camp, so we had some historic ideas of what the area looked like pre-dam. The project area itself, if you look at this photo here, it does say CFR2 right above the word project, and that is the remedial project area. So that's where EPA and ARCO and Envirocon did all the remedial work. That's where they were removing the 2.3 million cubic yards of contaminated material. The area downstream and the area upstream are the areas where we did restoration work. The reason that we went downstream and upstream of that is if you looked, and the little green line at the top is the former reservoir elevation. And so it was basically flat going upstream from the dam, as Peter showed, where the sediments were. And what we did is we basically, just in simple terms, we took the gradient from downstream on the Clark Fork River and matched it with the gradient upstream, and we drew a line in between, and that's that red line. And that red line tied in with some old stumps that we found further upstream, but it also tied in with the gradient upstream. So we looked at that gradient, and we noted that in order for us to do restoration, we had to go further upstream than what EPA was going to do. They were going to stop at that little line here where it says CFR2. That's the former duck bridge for people that knew what the reservoir was. We were going to go upstream, so we went upstream. A total of 17,000 feet was the restoration channel. There were two major parts of the negotiations that we had to work with Envirocon and ARCO and EPA. The first one was the dam removal. As Diana noted, under EPA's proposed plan, they were only going to remove a portion of the dam. Under restoration, we wanted the whole dam removed. And we wanted it removed down to certain elevations, because Envirocon and ARCO were going to removing it down to what EPA had required to protect human health and the environment. What we were trying to do is remove it down to an elevation that was going to help protect the fisheries and provide for a natural channel. So this is Russ and Diana standing on the dam as Envirocon is removing it. And then I noticed that Steve's here. The Chambels had a bedrock map. Len had developed a bedrock map of what the bedrock was beneath the dam. And what we negotiated with Atlantic Richfield and Envirocon was remove the dam structure in the spillway area down to an elevation of 3212 or bedrock. And that got us down to what we would consider a background level. And so that was pretty significant. On the powerhouse side, the powerhouse was removed down to an elevation that matched up with the powerhouse floor. So if you go out there today and if you bored down, you would actually hit the old powerhouse floor. The powerhouse floor was left in place. And that's a bench as you're coming downriver, it would be on the right side. So that was a big negotiation. And part of those negotiations were, so if Envirocon and ARCO were going to do those things, what was the state going to do? So the state was going to One, we built a big grade control structure prior to, that's that picture underneath the schematic. There's a bunch of rocks down there. We didn't know what the river was going to do when the dam was removed and you put the water back through that spillway. There was a great big scour hole below the spillway, and we didn't know how far, if that would head cut up. So we did build a big grade control structure there with many, many large rocks. So the dam removal was one of the big integration points, and then the other big integration point was what we called the grading plan. And I put as I was going through all the photos that I had, it was kind of going down a rabbit hole, to be honest with you, last week. Figure 20 came up, figure 28 came up. And figure 28 was a figure out of the South that we spent weeks, probably months, negotiating what figure 28 would look like. And at the end of the day, the state had a grading plan that we provided to Atlantic Richfield and Viracon for them to build. So the deal is that they would remove the dam, they would build a grading plan to our specifications. We would finish that grading plan, and we would do all the revegetation within the remedial project area, as well as doing additional restoration upstream. In simplified terms, that's what we did. As Diana noted, as the excavation took place, a lot of things came up. This is a picture of some stumps that were exposed during the excavation as Envirocon and ARCO were removing the contaminated sediments. They were able to dig around these stumps and actually leave them in place. This was one of the key facts or key points to this project. Envirocon didn't need to dig around those stumps. They had great big yellow equipment that could have easily torn those stumps out and gotten rid of them. But they took the time to go around them and to work with us on trying to preserve as much of that historic floodplain as we could. We didn't know it was there. When all of a sudden they started finding these things, it was a pretty unique, eye-opening experience. And I know Tony Leon's here. I took Tony and one of his foresters down there one time, and they went through and they were identifying the different trees. You could see the bark on the trees, and they could still tell if it was a cottonwood tree or a ponderosa pine or what type of tree it was. Pretty interesting stuff that occurred. The other thing that started happening, and I think Diana and Peter both noted it too, as you see in the picture on the right, things started growing. As these areas were exposed after 100 years, there were the sediments on top were removed at the right time of year. It was about this time of the year, and as the earth warmed up and the sun came out, willows, cattails, mosses, other things started growing out of this. And part of the cooperation again, we modified our grading plan, and Envirocon and ARCO and EPA were right there with us. It's like, yeah, let's preserve this as we can. Let's leave these. This was the historic floodplain. Why not make it the historic floodplain or the current floodplain? And so they worked with us. Actually, I think I was trying to remember it last night. Amy, maybe you can remember it, but I think we actually went out there with stakes and a rope and roped off some of these preservation areas, we call them, so the big haul trucks wouldn't run over it. But the Envirocon guys and the cooperation that everybody was pulling toward together on the project stayed out of those areas, and those areas were able to be preserved. As I noted, the revegetation, the state did take responsibility for all the revegetation on the project, from the dam all the way 17,000 channel feet upstream. That was a big undertaking, something I didn't have a lot of experience with, and I have that's right in my introduction. There's a lot of other people that I got to work with on this project that brought a lot of expertise to this project, and otherwise, you'd be looking at a strawberry garden out there or something if it was me. But the revegetation was probably one of the harder things. That's where all the hand labor was out there. Envirocon and ARCO got to use the big yellow equipment. The the stream contractors that work for the state had big equipment, but the revegetation, these guys were out there digging holes and carrying plants around on their backs and getting them in the ground. This is the what it looked like in 2011, what we called our as-built drawings, and this is what we ended up with. We built it about like we had hoped, with some modifications based on some of the information that came up during the construction of the project itself. And this is a picture of just upstream of Duck Bridge in 2011, prior to high flow. I'm not sure, does anybody remember what happened in June, May and June of 2011? Yeah, we had a pretty big high flow. That entire project area. So the river had just been put back into the new restored channel that we had constructed. And we had just a very, very good wet spring that year. We had, is this 13,000 CFS coming down. One of the unique things from a restoration perspective that we did on this project, and it was proposed by the public during part of our public comment period, and I think I know Chris is here. Chris Brick with the coalition proposed it, as well as others, that we do a peer review of our project. Something like this restoration had never been done before, and the design engineers agreed to it. They thought it would be a good idea. And at this point in time right here, one of the peer reviewers was visiting the site. He patted me on the back, and he goes, you know, Doug, you're probably thinking your project's really getting kicked in the ass right now. And it was. But he goes, at the end of the day, you're going to see a lot more benefit out of this high flow than you will the negative of it. And this is a picture of that spot instead of looking up from these tall trees you see here. I was standing in those tall trees looking up, that last photo. This is a picture from upstream looking at those. And this is a picture or a survey that we have on our website. And Amy Sacre with GM Environmentals here, they take these pictures every year for us. And she has pictures from 2011 all the way through 2024. And I put the 2012 and 24 pictures on here just to show, we call them green line photos, just to show how that area has matured in these 12 years. And we have been very fortunate. We've had some very good growing years environmentally, good wet years, some good dry years. And that area that was inundated in 2011 has recovered much better than we could ever had wanted to do. I might run over a little bit, Gary, because I just thought about something. Sorry, Mike.
No worries.
But
Good.
when we were doing our restoration planning and that type of thing, we got a comment, and I'm going to call you out again, Chris, but I think you made the comment about how much we were spending on revegetation. There was a project down in Utah that was built between two dams, and they were able to create floods every year with that. And they got really good regeneration from these naturally occurring floods. Well, those weren't necessarily natural because they were man-made out of a dam. But those floods really created a lot of very good habitat and very good vegetation. That's what we got in 2011. We couldn't plan for it, but that's what we got. And so we had this really neat event in 2011 that probably did the project as much good as a lot of the other things that we did. Lastly, one of the things that I always talk about this project as a we project. This is not my project. It wasn't Russ's project. It wasn't Chris Cook's project with Envirocon or Mike's project or Diana's project. It was a we project because we all understood that if we didn't come together to work on this together, it wouldn't have come together. The restoration wasn't, we couldn't even consider restoration without what the remediation did. We couldn't, Mike couldn't consider what the redevelopment did without the other two legs of the stool. So it was a we project. But the bigger we of this is all of you guys. There were several landowners out there that we had to work with. And they're recognizing this little sign up there on June and Pinky's property. But all the people that came together and gave support for this project, as Peter noted, the 15,000 public comments. Is this going to make the news? I won't say it then. The 15,000 public comments were significant in moving this project forward. There are some other Superfund sites within the basin and within this state that don't have that type of support. And I would claim that's some reason why they are stalled out. But the public support and the public backing for this this turnout right here, is awesome. Diane and I were talking before the first public meeting, or the first couple public meetings we had here in the Bonner Gym. The gym was full of people. So the public support behind this project is awesome. So that's why I do call it a we project, and I think that's the important thing about this is this project was not for any of us, it's for everybody here and the generations to come. Thank you. Yeah, anybody have any questions? Steve?
There was a question about there was a lot of questions about the pier under the former interstate bridge and maybe the railroad bridge, the putting to it a road away if they remove the pier. And it's still sitting there. I wonder if there are any plans to finally remove it.
Yeah, so underneath the I-90 bridges, the I-90 bridges were part of the remedial activities that had to be stabilized under the new, because they were built originally with the dam in place, and so they were not built to withstand a free-flowing river. Following the dam removal, the highway department did come in and put in new bridges that spanned the river, and currently I haven't heard this officially, Steve, but what I do know of is that the railroad is currently working on stabilizing their bridges, which is something that has to be done before the piers can come out. So I am taking that as a sign that the piers will be coming out, as we always say, soon. But, any more questions? The question is, why don't you leave the piers? You know what? I'm going to turn that over to Mike, because Mike has a much better explanation. He actually saw why the piers need to come out. So.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. I was the manager in 2011, and there was the Swiftwater Rescue Institute local fire department was out there doing some training. And the guy from Swiftwater swam a dummy out into the middle of the channel, and this was in June. It wasn't fully high water. It was probably at like 40, or I can't remember what it was. It wasn't low water, but it wasn't high water either. At any rate, they swam that dummy out into the middle of the river, and it had the buoyancy. It weighed about 115 pounds, of like a small person. The dummy hit that first pier, went down for like 10 seconds, and then came up, and then it hit the second pier, and it wasn't seen for over a year. They found it much, much later down by Canyon River Golf Course. And so those piers at certain water levels are certainly a hazard to recreational users, floaters in particular. Any boater that has intermediate skills can work their way around them, but for a lot of folks, it could be very dangerous. And they're quite the eyesore. A lot of people are like, what is that about? So, a couple good reasons, I think.
Yeah. Any other questions? Pass it on to you, Mike.
All righty. Swap spots. Well, thanks everyone for coming out today. It's great to see so many folks. This is awesome that there's this kind of interest in it. And I think my co-panelists here did a great job of laying out why it was a problem and what was done about it, the remediation piece and the restoration part of it. We always talked about the 3 R's of the Milltown Superfund project, though. The first R being remediation, removal of the dam and the worst of the sediments. The second R being restoration, the rebuilding of the river channel through the Clark Fork there. And then the third one is redevelopment. And redevelopment, something, like a lot of money and time went into trying to remove the dam and restore the rivers. Then there was just kind of a question like, then what? What do we do with this place? And that was a piece that I got to have some involvement in. Just back up a little bit, how I got involved generally, I would say, is because of these people here. Not all of them necessarily, but that little guy in the middle in his baptism gown is my grandfather. And then in that middle picture in the lower right-hand corner is my grandmother at the Bonner School. I got to give a shout out to Miney Smith because she found that photo was included in an exhibit at the Historical Museum. And I saw that and I cried. I saw my grandma as a 7-year-old because she lived out in Piltsville until 2002. But at any rate, and then in that far, on the left side in the lower corner, the little girl in the middle with the tassel on her head, that's my mom. So long connection on my mom's side. They're French Canadians. Cadger was their last name, if any folks knew them. On my dad's side, they were from Butte and Red Lodge, and they were all miners. My great-grandfather was a copper miner in Butte, and so how I actually got involved was through a group called CFR TAC. I was working for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, doing kind of education work on sustainable energy and agriculture. One of my bosses there was a woman named Kathy Hadley, and Kathy was the director of NCAT, and she was a resident in the Deer Lodge Valley, and she and her husband, Wayne, who used to be a fisheries biologist for Fish, Wildlife, and Park, were instrumental in getting the upper stretch of the Clark Fork listed as a Superfund site. Their basic question was, Butte's a site, Milltown's a site, how's this river in between not part of all that? At any rate, I was asked if they knew I lived in Missoula and had this connection to Milltown. They were looking for a board member. They said, Mike, do you want to be on the board of CFR TAC? I'm like, yeah, sure. And then they're like, do you want to be the board president? And I was like, I don't know. But I ended up as the president of the board for a couple of years. It became more and more of my world, sort of, and I went to work for him as a coordinator for a few years. And what CFR TAC did, it's the Clark Fork River Technical Assistance Committee. Through the Superfund law, there's a provision for technical advisory groups. And these groups basically help communicate the science of the cleanup to the general public. Engineers are often, they're great at what they do. Some are great communicators, sometimes maybe not so much. So we would work with technical advisors. One of them was Steve Schaumbell's dad. Len Schaumbell was a part of CFR TAC. Chris Brick is sitting back there. She was one of our technical advisors as well. Judy Matson was on the board. Great folks, all up and down the Clark Fork. And the main thing that we did was kind of the sort of help explain these complex cleanup projects. So we'd work with the tech people, and then I'd have a bit of a writing background, and then would work with graphic designers. And I also know an awesome pilot named Gary Matson who flew me around for many years taking pictures of the Milltown site. So like that publication up top we called the Dam News, which was basically a publication that came out in about 6 to 9 months in advance of the actual cleanup work. So it was to give kind of a visual depiction of what was going to happen. So long story short, I got involved with CFR TAC there. And as part of that, I became part of the Milltown redevelopment. There's another Dam News focused on the restoration piece. The Milltown Redevelopment Working Group. And that was a group that was brought together. Diana Hammer found a small grant to get us up and running, which basically we hired an amazing facilitator, Ginny Tribe. Where is she? She's here somewhere. Hi, Ginny. That brought us together, and we were going to be, we were told we were going to meet for 6 meetings. Well, we ended up meeting for over 7 years. And that's a good thing. Usually, it's like the first thing as the working group, we kind of broke it up into committees. We had a history committee, we had an infrastructure, a recreation, a governance committee, looking at all these issues that have some kind of bearing on the whole Superfund process. And how is this going to work for the community? How is it we're going to get the best result for the community? So we came out in 2005 with a general concept plan of what things could look out here. And then after that, we were like, well, let's make this thing real now. Let's keep going. And so some of the things that ultimately came out of the redevelopment working group were, one is like a community council. There's only one government in Missoula County. There's one city government. It's the city of Missoula. That's the only incorporated city in Missoula. So areas like Frenchtown and Lolo and Sealy all had community councils. Bonner didn't have one. We kind of advocated for that and got it on the ballot, and the folks voted for it, and you've had a working community council ever since. So that was one of the key achievements, but a lot of great things. We helped secure support for the reconstruction of the pedestrian bridge, the Black Bridge in town. I'm really racing over a lot of details. All these things you could augur into a half-hour presentation on each, practically. We also digitized the Jack L. Demmons collection of photos. Jack Demmons used to be the superintendent of the Bonner School over that way. He went around in the 70s and gathered up all these photos from basically the 1880s up into the 1950s. If you work in interpretation or storytelling, it was just a treasure trove. What a gold mine. And so we worked with the University of Montana to get all those photos digitized, and they're there today. It's an amazing collection. You've seen a few of them already. All those family photos were from the Demmons collection. Another thing was the Bonner, or the Piltsville Trail. That was something that the working group had fingerprints on as well, making that happen. But the biggest thing, and then a history website, which is now the Bonner Milltown history website. It started out as the Two Rivers, and so just trying to promote local history and all that. But the main focus of the group was kind of on the site itself. We winnowed our focus down to, what is this park going to look like? Or what is this space going to look like? And so in 2007, we went through, and here's just kind of a quick visual depiction of some of the things I was just talking about. There's the Piltsville Trail, the pedestrian bridge, the website. We also managed to have a bunch of the artifacts salvaged from the Milltown Dam, with the thought that maybe someday there's going to be an interpretive center here. And if you're going to have that thing, you kind of have to save all the pieces at first. So, but ultimately, we kind of narrowed our focus onto the park planning itself, and we worked with some great partners. A bunch of local landscape architects, Warren Hampton. I don't know if Warren's here today or not, but he's an architect who was really instrumental in a lot of that. Gary Weiner was with the National Park Service, a program called the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. He basically walked us through this design process. They call it a charrette, but it's just a very participatory design process. Did we have a meeting here for that, maybe? I think, yeah. A lot of the park plan was hatched right here in this building. Much of it downstairs, but here at the Catholic Church. We broke up into groups and looked at different parts of what could be the park, or what were the lands that were currently owned by Northwestern. And so we have today, the gateway area is that stretch that is along the Blackfoot that comes down from the Black Bridge. Then there was the confluence area, and then just the floodplain itself. So that we had three teams looking at each of those to make recommendations. A lot of what we ultimately did came from this. This really was marching orders, I think, for FWP as it went to develop the park. There are a few things in here that didn't quite make it, mostly in the confluence area. You'll see that round red center was where the interpretive center would have gone. Small matter with interpretive centers, they cost millions of dollars a year, or millions of dollars to build, and hundreds of thousands to run. So they're kind of a big ticket item. That sort of fell out of the mix in turn for what we called the interpretive plaza. You just had to have a space where you could gather people to tell stories about what was done here. The other thing is a pedestrian bridge across the Clark Fork. We were encouraged to dream like nobody was watching, kind of, and so some of those things haven't made it into the mix, and who knows, but so officially FWP became involved with the site in not officially, they had always been involved with the planning process. Chris Lorenz was somebody that worked for FWP, and he sat in on a lot of our meetings. Lee Bastian was the regional park manager who played a key role in all this. So we came up with this great design, and then we thought, well, now we got to make it happen. And so worked with people like Peter Nielsen and Diana and everybody just on this grant to the Natural Resource Damage Program that Doug manages. Doug has been the best friend a state park could ever have, I think. NRD has been the main benefactor of Milltown State Park ever since. You know, it was kind of a, we wrote this grant in 2010, I think, or 2009. It ended up creating a job, which ultimately I got, which I never dreamed I would be a park manager, but at any rate, so then there was a long process of getting the park up and running. You know, it started in late 2010 or 2011. Few highlights you can see there. You know, there was some land to acquire, all the northwestern lands and some additional lands. There was the overlook was constructed. That wasn't actually built by FWP or as part of the park process. It was actually part of remediation. And that was built by, largely by DEQ, I think, led that project, and Keith Large from there. You know, it was built so that people could watch the restoration and remediation happen. And by the time it was actually done, a lot of that work had already ended, but it really didn't matter because it was such an awesome place. I don't know if folks have been up there. If you haven't, I encourage you to go visit. It's off of Deer Creek Road. And then, yeah, so we, lots of up and downs with like the actual development of the park. There were a lot of challenges and it took longer than we ever thought. But, you know, by 2018, we had the grand opening of the confluence, and it was quite a celebration. It was in the pouring rain. It was beautiful the day before and beautiful the day after, just like June. You know, June, it's either going to be gorgeous or awful, one of the two. But we had more than 200 people turn out for the grand opening of the park. It was really an exciting thing. Since then, a few other things have kind of come online. One was we acquired the Bonner Development Group Park, which is out on the floodplain. That was in 2020. I think FWP is still working on access into it. There's a challenge with the railroad maybe, but. And then on Bandman Flats, opposite the shooting range, if folks have been out there, there's a trailhead there and a trail that leads into the old railroad tunnel, which is close. So here are the boundaries of the park. In total, it's, I think, about 645 acres. There's a couple little island parcels. You can see the Blackfoot there. We don't have a trail connection to it yet, but hopefully that's in the works. There's a new owner at the West Log Yard who expressed some interest in a trail connection there. And I think it's really important because if you had that little, about 3/4 of a mile of a trail connection, you could hike from the confluence probably about 3 or 3.5 miles up the Blackfoot before you hit private property. So just some great access into Johnson Creek and other places. So this is a map of kind of our developed spaces. You've got the trailhead at Bandman, the flats, you've got the overlook, the confluence area, and then the gateway. Trails throughout, probably about 5 miles of trails. Let's see. And then just to give you a quick kind of visual tour of the different sites, this is the confluence area on a quiet day. Most of the year, I'd say 10 months of the year, it's pretty quiet at the confluence. It's a great place to go sit and watch the river or walk a dog. July and August, it's a different story. I'll get to that in a second. The floodplain, there's just, that's the heart of the park, basically. You know, there's probably, 400 acres on the floodplain, I think. And there are trails on both sides. The side, would it be river left side, you can access from the overlook. There's trails down to it. The other side, there's still some access challenges there. It's all accessible via boat. You can float into these sites, but right now there's not legal access to a couple of the parcels. This is what we call the gateway, just that trail along the Blackfoot down to the confluence. And then this is the Blackfoot parcel. Again, like you have legal float-in access, and I know folks do hike in there. You know, once upon a time, that was a heavily industrialized site as well. There was the Bonner Dam was the first one, long before the Milltown Dam was built by roughly 20 years. And, you know, that's where they had the log pond that they'd corral logs in that were floated downstream or dumped into the river by the railroad when the big Blackfoot Railroad ran. Major restoration work went on there as well. It was all kind of related to the Milltown site, you know, so they removed the Bonner Dam, they removed all the timber cribs, they removed the bridge piers from the old railroad, and then they, and this was a DEQ project, I think, they took out the old hot pond, or cooling pond, I guess. They called it the hot pond, though, I think, yeah. And that widened the river, you know, back to a more natural state. So you see a couple industrialized photos on the right there, and then river set free there on the left with a floater. Let's see. And then this is the Bandman Flats property. You can see a nice little trailhead there. That trail goes about 3/4 of a mile to the railroad tunnel, which that area is closed off. Right now there's some, in the last couple of years of my time with FWP, we learned just how unstable that bluff is. There's some real issues there, so it's kind of closed off for now. I got the high sign from Gary there. We got raced through these. This is the overlook itself. You see a lot of photos of what the exhibit area looked like. I was just reading yesterday that FWP has released an environmental assessment to relocate that piece of the overlook bluff exhibit. Basically because, yeah, there are cracks in the trail, and there's some tension cracks on top, and so, but we had technical consultants tell us that if you just push that thing 100 feet back, it's probably very secure. And one thing I really want to do is also acknowledge the FWP staff in the room here. We've got Clint, who's the ranger for Milltown, and Ryan, who's the new manager. So hope I'm not stepping on toes here at all. I don't know what's going on with FWP these days, but I did see that the other day. So welcome, you guys. So that's Bandman. And then, you know, just wanted to talk briefly about, like, what's the appeal? Why would people go out there? For me, I'm such a history nut. There are just so many stories to tell at Milltown. I feel like you could stand at the confluence and basically tell the history of the American West there, whether it's with indigenous people, Lewis and Clark, John Mullen, the industrialization of the rivers, and then the restoration. I mean, it is just a rich site for telling stories about the past. And that's something I've always been excited. These were the panels that were up at the overlook, not currently accessible, but they may be updated. I'm not sure. Couple other panels along the trail, you know, that goes from the gateway all the way to the confluence. Got ones talking about, you know, indigenous pathways and lands for the Salish people. You know, and I should have backed up and said, just, you know, the human story at Milltown begins with the Salish and their ancestors. You know, it was known to them as the place of bull trout, and Naitistum is the Salish word. It was a major crossroads for them and other tribes. But, you know, a deep, deep, rich history. And one of the things I really enjoyed about my work was working with the tribes on trying to tell that story, because it's not my story to tell, but make sure we got it right. And so we worked with tribal elders and the culture committee. So a couple more panels there. Just wanted to point out there, Milltown State Park was not the first park at the confluence. Back in William A. Clark's days, there was the Riverside Park, and he built that to be sort of a little mini Columbia Gardens, if you're familiar with what Columbia Gardens was in Butte. But it was quite the park. They would get thousands of people out there for log rolling contests and picnics, and the St. John Society of French Canadians would be there, and the Finns would have their parties and picnics, and it was quite the place. Also may have had a Ku Klux Klan rally there in the 20s, which I don't know if which is shocking to know that they were active in Montana too, once upon a time. So yeah, capturing some of that history, there's what's called a story map online on the FWP website. Basically, it's a great online way of showing maps and photos and text and videos. And if you're interested in more of this stuff, I encourage you to have a look at that. And then just, what do you do out there? I mean, like for me, I'm the history buff. I love that part of it. But there's some great recreation too. There's some nice trails up at the overlook, down on the floodplain, along the rivers. And there's a little bit of water recreation goes on out there as well. You guys are probably familiar with the term tube hatch. That always happens when the water hits about 60 degrees and the air temperature hits 90. Watch out, because everybody and their brother and sister is going to want to be on the river. My last couple of years at work in 22 and 23, I think we had roughly 50,000 people pass through the confluence area in 2 months, just July and August, so almost 1,000 a day. It's crazy, but it's also a great thing, because tubing is it's for everybody. You don't need a boat to go tubing, you just need something to float on. And I included one of the Demons photos there too, because river recreation has always been popular out here. People would tool around on boats, and there's I think a photo in the Demon collections of somebody in a sailboat on the reservoir. So yeah, I'm about wrapped up there then. Yeah, so if there are questions, I'm happy to answer. And just the project in general, it was a labor of love for me. It was nothing I could have done without the great support of all these people here. I mean, Peter played such a huge role in the working group. Diana got us all rolling. Doug was super supportive throughout. It's just, he mentioned it was a we project, and it certainly was. All right, thank you. Yeah.
I'm Julie Call. And in the late 90s, I was working at the Montana Trout Unlimited office. Could you just really briefly tell us how Trout Unlimited was involved in this?
Yeah. I mean, throughout the whole process, I know they definitely tracked on it. And these guys might have a better sense of their level of engagement. David Brooks, who's the head of Trout Unlimited now, was one of our keynote speakers when we had our grand opening. He literally has written the book on the Superfund project, Restoring the Shining Waters. But yeah, it's just, TU definitely had a big role. I mean, so many nonprofits really have had a big role out at Milltown in its development, and then even in its beyond that. Dalit Gusio is here with the Clark Fork Watershed Education Program somewhere. There she is. They are the ones that bring all the kids out to Milltown. Every fifth grader in Milltown goes out to the park for, learning about the whole cleanup, remediation, and all kinds of STEM topics. Montana Natural History Center has been a great partner. The Floss Knox group, like in a Watershed Education Network. I mean, just lots of great partners over the many years.
But TU was definitely an active partner. Bruce Farling was engaged, and I think the Clark Fork Coalition took the lead, and I gave them the credit. Bruce was there as well.
Yeah, the coalition was huge. Yeah, Judy.
So one other project that is on the back of your handout is the confluence of people that was not directly part of the Superfund cleanup, but without the Superfund cleanup, we never would have all gotten together with the knowledge of how to proceed to make the Bonner Milltown History Center. So thanks to all of you for getting us started 16 years ago now.
My name is Patricia Hogan. I live in Missoula. And as part of my thanks to these folks for making this fascinating presentation today, I just want to point out the value of government workers in our lives, if ever there was a question about it. This is what bureaucrats do.
Thank you, Patricia.
I have a question for all of you guys. This was really enjoyable to actually have all four of you coming together and telling the whole story. And as someone who is in charge of trying to teach the story for the future generation, right? I wonder if you could each tell me, what do you think is the most important aspect of the story of this watershed, of the restoration of Milltown, because it's so place-based? What is the most important aspect of this story that we should make sure the kids, the future generation, learn? Yeah,
Well,
sorry.
I'll just go brief. Oh.
I need to identify myself. Delete Gusho from Ripple. We're Ripple now.
Oh, you're Ripple now. Okay.
The Center for Education and Ecosystem Studies.
Nice. So, I gave a few talks out at the park. In fact, I always like to be on site as opposed to in a room. But, and talking to young people, just that big things are possible if you can come together as a group, if you have a lot of patience, The site was listed as, or the dam came out was first listed as Superfund site in 1983. It was 23 years later before the dam actually came out, or even more. My math there is a little weird, maybe. And then just the park takes a long time, but good things take a long time, but keep at it is what I would say as a lesson. I'd turn it over to Doug.
That's a very good question. From the natural resource damage program or restoration perspective is, what was taught to me here is let the natural processes take over, and as have here, the natural processes have done a great job of restoring the confluence. So, let Mother Nature do her thing.
That's a great question. I think one of the most important lessons is it relates to the time that we were working in. It was the best of times. I mean, we had, when people in the boat all are rowing the same direction and not getting stuck in the eddies as they float down the stream, you can get somewhere. And when you're working together in a bipartisan way, which is something we don't see that much of these days, you can get things accomplished. And we had a huge variety of people, all the way from the tribes to state agencies to local groups working together. And it is a remarkable thing what you can accomplish when you're all pushing the same direction.
Well, I really respect all of your points, and it's a little hard to go last. But I am a former federal worker, and my heart breaks every day, a little bit. But I would say that it really is amazing what you can do when you set your sights high, you work together, and you go about solving the problem rather than posturing or saying, I'm not going to do that because I don't like them or something. And just trying to figure out, Pat Sappel said it's all about the resource all the time. That was kind of a motto. And yeah, it's about the resource. And I can't believe we've gotten through 2 full hours without saying it's a confluence of rivers, of people, and events. And we couldn't, the remediation would have been fine, but it wouldn't have been what we have, because we needed to do the remediation to make the restoration possible, to make the redevelopment possible, to make what we currently have possible. And we couldn't have done it alone, none of us. We all needed you. We needed that public support to give Governor Martz the ability to stand up. In fact, I remember getting a call from headquarters, EPA headquarters, saying, what are you doing? You're removing a dam in the West. What are you doing? And we said, it's okay. The governor's on board. We've got the states, the state agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the tribes, the local government, most of the local community, and just trying to celebrate the past and make a better future. And so, so thank you so much. That was a great question.
We could go on, but I can smell those pasties warming up. They're making me hungry, and you are too. Thank you so much for making this a wonderful program. Just like it wouldn't have been nearly as effective if nobody came. So we'll see you next January for our next series of roundtables.
Good job, guys. Nice job, you guys.